And welcome back to Pod of the Century. Galen Clavio here once again with you. Daniel, Camille back joining us once again. Gents, great to have you back. How you doing? How are things treating you today?
Great. I think that was a day of football which saw a lot of ups and downs on the entertainment scale. So yeah, it's a good perspective of the sport, I think, today.
Yeah, I think on yesterday's pod we kind of previewed today's matches, talked about how like this was kind of maybe the day we were expecting some drama to happen, and I think we saw a lot of that.
Yeah, we really did, and we'll dive right into it. We'll start, as we normally do, with the game that just finished. Belgium 1, Canada 0. This is a game where you could kind of take two completely separate narratives on it, and they'd probably both be right. On the one hand, you could be like, wow, Canada looked awesome. They had an expected goal number of, I think, 2.21 in the first half. They were just peppering the Belgians with shots. They had a penalty shot. They should have had another penalty. They were all over Belgium basically for the whole first half, except for one moment when the Belgians showed what it's like to be on this stage consistently as they lofted a ball right over the Canadian defense and were able to slot it home for what ended up being the game-winning goal. So you can look at what Canada did in this one and you can say, hey, great effort. This is the team that we saw through most of CONCACAF qualifying, and they were, clearly kind of the deserved winners of the qualifying process for CONCACAF. On the flip side, you can't win if you don't score. And, Canada really looked like they had no clue where the actual goal mouth was. Just shooting all over the place, except on goal in most cases. They have a couple that tested Courtois, including that nice header in the second half. But, Daniel, to start with you on this, Canada, they ran themselves out of the game in that first 60 minutes or so. And, if they had nicked a goal or two as clearly was the plan, it's a completely different ball game. But they didn't, and they really left themselves with no chance to get back into it because they were so exhausted in the last 30 minutes of the game. Your overall thoughts on that performance, I guess, first from Canada?
I think they surprised everyone, and they certainly surprised Belgium. Right from kickoff. I don't think Belgium were expecting the pressure. I don't think Belgium were really expecting Canada to get many shots off in the first half. And as you said, an expected goals of 2.2 in the first half, that's incredibly high. The problem is you don't win if you don't score, and you don't score if you don't put it on target. They had 22 shots in the game, and only 3 of them were on target. It's just nowhere near enough on this stage, especially against a team like Belgium, who are a top 5 FIFA ranked team in the world.
Yeah, it's just not a recipe for success. And certainly, the precursor to what you just said, you can't get shots on target if you don't get shots off. And so you do have to credit them for that. And look, a lot of what Canada was able to do in terms of their ball movement, in terms of their movement down the flanks, was really impressive. It was similar to some degree what we saw at Denmark yesterday, where they just couldn't put anything on the end of it, and that ends up coming back to bite them in a big way. As they were unfortunately just once they got that out of their system to some degree, there wasn't a lot else that they could do. Camille, on the flip side, this Belgian squad, they didn't look great. This wasn't so much absorbing pressure as to some degree getting lucky that Canada wasn't more clinical, and yet they come away with the victory in this one.
Yeah, definitely agree. They looked surprised. There were questions about the aging defense for Belgium. I think just escaping those penalty calls, obviously the missed penalty, and then 2 more that should have been called, really helped their cause. But I still feel like they were a little calm, like they weren't completely shattered, and they were able to counterattack in that first half. But I think, like you mentioned, Canada kind of outran themselves, and then in the second half they already had that lead, and were kind of able to pass around the back a little bit more. Didn't allow as many chances, but in the end they just had that technical ability to put one away. Canada was pretty wasteful with its chances, and I think they missed Romelu Lukaku in moments, but Michy Batshuayi came through in that for the one goal, and but I think Kevin De Bruyne didn't have his best game in midfield. Probably could have found a few assists there. And against, more tournament ready teams, experienced teams, that it'll have to be better.
Yeah, I think you really raised a good point. It wasn't like Belgium set up to absorb pressure. They really didn't look like they were expecting the pressure, as you said. And that's a very different thing. Now, I do give them credit for not completely cracking. And frankly, I mean, you go back to that what should have been the second penalty on Belgium that wasn't called, the back pass from Hazard that should have reset the offside, and then the foul. I mean, it's not a given that they're going to score on that, given how bad the first penalty attempt was from Canada. But that really does change the complexion of things. And look, I mean, maybe at that point you end up with a situation like we saw in the U.S. game where Canada takes the lead but isn't able to adapt when Belgium inevitably starts to push forward. They never really had to do that in the second half. And I think Belgium deserves a lot of credit, Daniel, for just kind of once they got that goal, realizing that ultimately it was going to probably take more of an effort than Canada was able to actually provide offensively in terms of clinicality to even tie the game up, let alone put Canada in position to win.
Yeah, I think it's another situation where the experience prevailed for Belgium. That back line is experienced. Hazard, De Bruyne, very experienced in these situations. Hazard looked maybe a little bit too experienced. I think he looked very leggy. I don't think he's going to drop any masterclasses over this tournament. But I think we can equate it to the Wales-USA game. Canada came out the blocks heavy, kind of surprised the older, more experienced lot. And then in the second half, some tactical changes were made, and they kind of used their experience to hold out. Although Wales didn't get the win, it's a similar result in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds us all how lucky the U.S. was that they scored that goal early, because I think you're absolutely right. This game could have turned out, or that game could have turned out exactly the way that this one did, in terms of Wales nicking a goal and then the U.S. basically grasping at whatever chances they could get at the end and not being successful. So too bad for Canada. And look, that wasn't a game that I think anybody expected them to win going in, so it would have been gravy to some degree. It is just tough to not even get a point out of it when you played with such offensive dominance through the first 40 or so minutes of the game, and really even into the second half. And until their legs ran out, I was pretty pleased with what I saw out of the Canadians. But they got to figure out how to put the ball in the back of the net. They might have chances against the other two teams in the group. I'm not totally sure, though, Camille, because if let's flash back to that game. And again, I'm guessing neither of you were up for it. You didn't miss a huge amount, but Morocco and Croatia, it was an entertaining game in that both teams had their chances. Nobody scores. It ends up being a 0-0 draw. And, what I took out of that was that, Croatia looks old, which we expected. And Croatia looks like they don't really have anybody up front who can put the ball in the back of the net. But they also look very stout defensively. Morocco was spunky, but also really doesn't have anybody to put the ball in the back of the net. Canada, if they can clone what they took out of this game and somehow steal a goal early against either of those teams, could be in pretty good shape overall.
Yeah, actually, I did wake up for it. The first half, at least.
Hey, nice.
First half.
You fell asleep in the second half?
Yeah. From what I saw, though, and then the rest, I watched the second half back. But, I think we've seen, 2 0-0 results the other day, and this was definitely not one of those boring ones. I'd say it was pretty entertaining, even though there weren't maybe many clear-cut chances for either team. I think this midfield battle was pretty intriguing. You have that experienced Croatia midfield, and I think Morocco kind of handled it well, and just ultimately they looked evenly matched. And in terms, I think you mentioned Denmark for the other game, but I think this Croatia showed shades of Denmark, and like you mentioned, with just not having that clinical striker up top, because I think unless it's some moment of Modric magic, they can really have some struggles going forward, especially against these other two sides. And I think I'm hopeful for Canada's chances against Croatia to at least nick a point. and that game with Morocco means everything. So
had myself muted there. Yeah, and the order here is interesting because I think Canada to some degree got their toughest game out of the way first, which I can go back and forth on whether that's actually a good thing or a bad thing. I feel like I change my rationale every time somebody asks me about a different team. But that said, when I look at Canada and you take the positives out of the game that they played today, and you're like, all right, well we didn't pick up a point, but played really well against a top 5 team and didn't embarrass ourselves, and probably were hard done by the lack of VAR check on the call in the box. That's maybe a replicable thing because we've got legs, and we're probably not going to face as stout of goal keeping in either of the other 2 games that we're playing. And certainly not going to face the offensive threat that Belgium provides. So there probably is something in it for Canada as you move forward, as they take on Croatia on Sunday, and then in the final game of the set, they'll get to play Morocco. And so, yeah, we'll see what happens with all of that. Going back to that Morocco-Croatia game, Daniel, I know you weren't up for it, but looking at this game, this was a Croatia team that a lot of people were I think still thinking about Croatia from 2018 and that run that they went on all the way to the final. This does not appear to be anywhere close to the same team, and that they may end up getting out of this group, but it looks like it's going to be a dogfight for them as they move forward.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you still have some very impressive names, and they're going to have a very solid midfield. It's just whether they get overrun by a more energetic, more youthful team. I mean, Modric, Brozovic, Kovacic, they're all very technical players. They're all slightly similar players, albeit, but they're very technical players. And I think, in theory, that's a midfield good enough to get you out of a group. Now, what we've just seen from Canada was an extremely energetic performance. They harassed everyone as soon as they got a touch on the ball, very high press. And Croatia could get overrun on that. They've got Dejan Lovren as their center back. He's been slow since the age of 18. So he's going to struggle against the likes of Jonathan David, Buchanan, and Davies. So I think that's going to be interesting to see. That game this weekend is really important. I think if Canada can get a point out of Croatia, they're going to be feeling really good going into that Morocco game to get 3 points in that and probably take the second spot in the group.
Yeah, it should be fascinating. In the game today, Croatia 65% possession, but only 5 shots, 2 shots on frame. Morocco with 8 shots on 35% possession. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. And I think your point is well taken. I mean, I will say if I'm Croatia, I'm frightened by how much Canada was using the flanks today against this Belgian team, because there's definitely not a lot of speed out there for Croatia, and some aggressive pressing could be a real problem that even age and savvy might not be able to overcome. So we'll see what happens with that. There wasn't a whole lot else to come out of that early game to talk about, but we do have a lot to talk about in the other 2 games. So Camille, let me go to you. Let's start with that Spain-Costa Rica massacre. This one was not close from the moment basically the ball was kicked. I mean, Spain looked incisive right off of the bat, and they really just never let up. 7-0, which is not a scoreline we normally see in this game. And it probably could have been more than that. I feel like to some degree they took the foot off the gas a little bit in the second half. What were your reflections from this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all knew what Costa Rica was going to do, try and sit back and then just try and make it maybe low scoring, maybe not make the goal differential as bad as it was. But yeah, I think it's clear that they're just not competitive on this level, or at least against obviously some of the top tier teams. And I think Spain had a lot of lineup questions with how Enrique picked this squad. But I mean, against this kind of team, it really just didn't matter. We'll see how what happens the rest of the way. But yeah, Costa Rica they showed nothing in this game. I think I don't know if it's completely true or if I might be reading off the wrong page, but they had an expected goal of 0, plain 0. They didn't do anything moving forward. And for Spain, I mean, their midfield has a lot of young parts, and they looked ready. I mean, they probably played the most fluid football out of any team so far, in my opinion. And even though it's a bad Costa Rica team, this doesn't bode well for any of the other teams in the group. So.
Yeah, and we'll get to that as we get a little bit further forward with things. But Daniel, you first of all, your reflections on this Spain squad and what they were able to do today.
I thought the first thing I found really interesting was Rodri sitting in as a centre back. We usually see him play in that pivot role, very Busquets-esque, but Busquets is almost impossible to take out of this team. He's kind of he's the heartbeat of the Spanish national team. So I thought it was interesting pairing him next to Laporte, obviously his club teammate at Man City. And I thought they both looked very solid. Now, we do know Costa Rica got 0 shots off. So they clearly weren't tested, but also that was probably because they were suppressing them somewhat. But
yeah, they also had 18% possession on the game. So it's anyway, go on.
And I think that part of that is Laporte had about 170 passes as a centre back in that game. A centre back averages in that like 70 passes range. Right. That's absurd. 170 passes for your centre back. It's just the ball is recycled constantly around that team. That the Costa Rica team looked so tired so early on, and you could see they were getting angry with themselves. They lost their shape completely, and that's when after the third goal goes in, then the floodgates just open. And in a World Cup, you can't do that. In a 3-game group stage, that's a huge no-no, and that's that tournament over realistically.
Yeah, and it's going to be really fascinating because, this Costa Rica squad, they looked non-competitive. I mean, I think certainly you can look at, what happened in that England-Iran game, and that was a different kind of non-competitive. Like Iran looked like they didn't want to be there. Costa Rica looked like they shouldn't be there. And that's going to be fascinating to watch because if Costa Rica is just like, well, we're toast, which we've seen before. Like we've seen squads, they get there, they play a game, they're clearly not in it, and then they're essentially just mentally out of the picture. That's 3 points to everybody else in the group, which really reframes the calculus of what happens in this group. And I was as we kind of segue into the last game that we're going to talk about today, the Germany-Japan game. I remember tweeting early on in the Spain game, I was like, Germany might be in real trouble right now. Germany loses today 2-1 to Japan, which was a mildly surprising result, especially the way that the game started. Japan completely flipped a switch in the second half and, found this level of energy and kept it up. And Germany really didn't know what to do with it. German defending was kind of shambolic throughout that second half. But now, Germany's got 0 points. Both Spain and Japan have 3 apiece. Spain's got a +7 goal differential, and Japan's almost certain to pick up 3 points against Costa Rica, which really puts the Germans behind the 8 ball. Daniel, let me start with you on this one. What were your overall reactions, first of all, to that Germany-Japan game and the way that it ended up playing out over 90 minutes?
I was certainly shocked. Of all the games that I would have predicted an upset, I wouldn't have predicted Germany. They come into a tournament and they're just very on it. Obviously, this is a fairly new team. There's some younger players dispersed between some older heads like Muller and all of that, Neuer at the back. But yeah, I was just surprised. And Germany seemed to switch off in the second half, which is really interesting, considering it's a team full of such world-class players. And Japan just looked incredibly organized, as they always are in tournaments. Incredibly organized, very fit. Looked like they had more legs on Germany towards the end of the game. And a very impressive result. And now Japan will like their chances going into the rest of the group.
Yeah, Camille, Germany had 74% possession in this game. 26 shots, 9 on goal, got 1 goal out of it. And yet, yeah, Japan, as Daniel said, just they never took their foot off the accelerator. What was your reaction to this one?
Yeah, on yesterday's pod, I talked about I was pretty high on Japan to kind of sneak out of this group. I didn't think the upset would come against Germany. I was actually expecting a draw in this, but yeah, obviously a shocking result. I think Germany bossed it early on. They were kind of hard done by an offside call. Maybe that penalty shouldn't have been given that they got. But they had chances to put it away early, and then I think Japan in the second half, like you said, flipped the switch. I think the manager got his substitutions right. I think some of those players should have started, and ultimately, yeah, there were also some pregame, with the armbands. So I think their minds were also maybe on a different subject. And yeah, now they're just, like you were mentioning. Now they play Spain next. I don't know if they could win that match, and you kind of have to win out at this point, because even though Costa Rica is a free 3 points, or at least how it looks, this goal differential, if they end up tying with Spain somehow, or Japan, because Japan, in my opinion, should go through after the next match. So it's basically, if you tie with Spain on points, you really have to pour it on Costa Rica. So yeah, I don't know if they could come back from this, honestly.
It's tough, and it's like the one result we've seen, or the one combination of results that like knocks potentially a favorite out. Like Argentina loses a couple of days ago, and everybody's like, "My God!" But that group is recoverable largely because of what happened in the other game. Germany does not have that luxury in this one, and even the U.S. I would say is in better shape than Germany right now, because they have a point and they're still in contention with the team that they got a point against. Whereas, it's like you said, it's hard to see Germany matching up against the way that Spain looked today. Now everything can change, certainly. Certainly that might have been just Spain running roughshod over a team that doesn't know how to handle a really well-organized side. Maybe Germany just had a bad day at the office mentally, but it's hard to look at how clinical and how technically adept Spain was on the ball today, and not think to yourself, as bad as the German defense looked at the times when they had to stop Japan, who, while well organized, Daniel, as you said, is definitely not an elite technical squad. It's hard to envision that transposing over to Spain, where it's like, hey, we're gonna set up shop and we're gonna stop this. It's really hard to get your head wrapped around that, and it's also hard to imagine Japan, as organized as they are, not putting at least a couple goals past Costa Rica, given how they look today. So it's not over yet. And if you're, my wife, big Germany fan, was not pleased with how things went by any stretch of the imagination. But they're going to have to get a result against Spain at minimum. And then they're going to have to figure out, something in that final game where they're able to, cut down on the goal differential. It's a really fascinating scenario. A really interesting game or set of games today, I think. And it's now a couple of days in a row that we've had, some whoa, what the hell moments in this tournament. Anything else stick out for you guys today, or any kind of larger narratives that you'd like to bring to the audience's attention?
Yeah, I think, Camille, you mentioned it slightly there. The Germany players in their pre-match team photo, they all had their hands over their mouths in a statement which kind of implied that they were being silenced, which we kind of all know is what is happening. I also thought it was interesting that there was a German minister who was sat next to Infantino in the stands, and she actually wore the One Love armband, which has been the topic of much controversy and suppression by FIFA and the Qatari officials. And I think it's the first outward protest we've seen from players in the tournament. And I wonder if it's going to be the start, if that's the floodgates now opened for multiple protests, or if that's going to be it. And it's just going to be one symbol of we're being silenced and not much else. I don't think it helps that they lost the game, because the talking points are now going to be on the fact that Germany were upset. If they won the game as they were expected, I think maybe there would have been more talk about their pre-match protest.
Yeah, it's tough because, there's doing the, and this would have happened in England if all of the kerfluffle around Harry Kane wearing the armband had happened, and then they'd, drawn somehow or against Iran or lost against Iran. This is to some degree, it's where players are oftentimes put in an impossible situation, and coaches are put in an impossible situation, because you want to make a statement or take a stand and say, this is what's right in our opinion, and this is how you feel. But then it always gets equated back to what happens on the field if it ends up being something negative for the team. And yeah, it's I don't know. We're not going to get a lot of it here in the U.S. because we tend to not get a lot of German-based news. But I will be interested to see how the German press reacts to this overall situation. It's a weird dynamic, and if you look at some of the news coming out of Europe, I mean, the Danish Federation is like talking openly about, hey, maybe we'll leave FIFA. And the English FA demanded like an emergency meeting with FIFA in a hotel in Qatar, like the day before the match or the morning of the match or something like that. So there's a lot of like stuff that's not the games going on behind the scenes that is, calling it a distraction kind of minimizes it unnecessarily, but it is distracting. And it is a really fascinating subplot because it's continued to build, as FIFA has to some, and, a lot of people looked at the German response and really applauded them on social media before the game. Not a lot of people were doing that after the game, and that's going to be the interesting dynamic. Camille, any thoughts on that or anything else going on that you'd like to bring up?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you've said it all about, those issues apart from the play on the field. I guess just closing thoughts on that group for Germany. I know we've maybe made it seem like it, but maybe we shouldn't completely overreact. I mean, teams can, switch it off from game to game. Spain looked very good, but obviously Germany will be a different challenge. That could be obviously a very close match. It'll still be difficult for Germany to get a result. I think that they need 3 points because to expect Spain to not get 2 points or a draw in each a point against Japan, they really need other results to go their way. So, but I think Germany has the ability, and I think they might also have some revenge on their minds. I forgot what competition it was maybe a year ago where Spain just absolutely thrashed them as well. Similar type of results. But I think if Leroy Sané is fit for that game, I know he was on the bench, but he wasn't actually available today. Some sort of knee injury in training, because Kai Havertz up top is just not going to work out. So I think if he comes back, that gives them another option, and it could just be anything can happen in that match. I think it'll be a close game, but I ultimately don't see Germany coming out with the win. Probably a close tie, and they're bowing out.
Wild, just wild. Let's okay. So real quick as we wrap up, let's talk about the games tomorrow. Another curious combination of games coming up tomorrow. Thanksgiving here in the United States. So we start with Switzerland, Cameroon, longtime rivalry between those two countries. That's followed by a very intriguing game, our first Group H game, Uruguay and South Korea, an 8 a.m. special, just as everybody's getting up to do the cooking. And then Portugal, Ghana at 11 a.m. And then we wrap things up at 2 with Brazil versus Serbia. You guys know the drill. Camille, let me start with you. What game are you most looking forward to tomorrow and why?
Man, this is tough. I have my eyes on 2 games. I'm going to go ahead with Uruguay and South Korea. I think everyone's expecting Portugal to top this group. I think one of these teams has the potential to spoil that. And I think, obviously everyone's expecting one of these 2 teams to come in second and qualify. And they get to play each other right away. I think this is just one of those matches where they can really hurt each other. As we saw in a USA Wales type of game, if they come away with a draw in this game, then you're kind of playing on goal differential. But I still think both of these teams have a chance against Portugal. But it'll be interesting to see because Son's obviously been dealing with his face injury and all that, and he's trying to, after the last World Cup, they were kind of hard done in that group, and he wants to take them out of the group this time. But I believe in this Uruguay squad. I think their midfield's pretty improved. They have a veteran core. Their strikers are aging, but yeah, I think there's a lot on the cards like right away for these 2 teams playing each other because they are expected to battle for that second spot.
Daniel.
I think the Brazil-Serbia game's the one I'm going to be watching most because I think we've seen the favorites, the maybe 5 favorites in the tournament, either overperform or underperform. We've seen England overperform, Spain overperform, France second half overperform, Germany underperform, Belgium probably underperform today. So I'm interested to see. I think Brazil are one of the other favorites in that group, see if they follow the likes of England and France, or if they kind of fall into the Argentina category of maybe we were a little bit too high on them. And Serbia will give them a test. Serbia have some threat up top, and they're not a walkover team. So that's going to be an interesting one for me, I think.
I like those choices. I'm really fascinated by the other 2 games. Because the African teams have, I think, punched above their weight a bit so far in this tournament. I was pretty impressed with how Morocco played today. I was impressed with how Senegal played. They played well above what I thought they'd be capable of playing on match day 2. Portugal, we know, is completely mercurial. It's hard to, they should be a favorite. And yet with this Cristiano Ronaldo drama, maybe the release, the mutual termination from United, maybe that solves it to some degree. Maybe they're able to just focus on the football. But I could also see Portugal come out and just be mentally in a completely different spot from where they need to be. And Ghana, who has 0 expectations on them right now, being able to maybe push them a bit. And, I've got Switzerland coming out of the group of Group G. They're always pretty clinical. They're pretty well organized in these tournaments. But I'm also fascinated to see if Cameroon can, to some degree, bring the level of energy that we've seen from some of these non-UEFA clubs so far in this tournament. I feel like a lot of, and this kind of picks up on what Daniel was saying, a lot of the UEFA teams have underperformed a little bit, based on what you would have expectations. Not so much the top teams, because I think, as you mentioned, England and Spain and France in the second half played really well. But I was not impressed with how Poland played. I was not impressed with how Denmark played. I was not impressed with how Croatia played. I was not really impressed with how Belgium played. I'm wondering if that might be a little more of a trend. It's been a great cup so far for the Asian Confederation, so I'm curious if the African Confederation can maybe get in on some of the fun. So I think there's something for everybody to watch, and this is going to be maybe one of the most packed sports days in U.S. history, as you're going to have 4 World Cup games, 3 NFL games, the Egg Bowl in college football, and then a bunch of college basketball games going on as well. So no shortage from basically 5 a.m. until midnight of things to watch, ways to avoid your family if that's what you need, which is, of course, as big of a tradition in America for Thanksgiving as turkey and stuffing are. So, gents, this was fun, as always. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, thank you for having me on again, and looking forward to tomorrow's slate.
Yeah, thank you so much. Final round of final games of the first match day for the group stage. So feels like we're kind of pushing through this pretty quickly, honestly. But I'm excited. I think this will be one of the best days out of the first groups. So
groups G and H always feel like a foreign country. It's like you wait so long and you get used to all the other ones, and then it's like, oh yeah, I forget. Then they always go last. And but no, I agree. It's been a rapid fire move through this first round of games. And it's hard to believe that, like you said, by Friday, we're going to be on the second round of group stage games. This is an abnormally paced World Cup for a bunch of reasons. And that might be the biggest one, but we'll enjoy the action tomorrow. My thanks to Camille. My thanks to Daniel. My thanks to all you folks for listening in. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Just search for Pod of the Century. Subscribe on Spotify as well, or you can check us out on YouTube. Go to the IU Sports Media YouTube channel and check us out there. For Camille and Daniel, I am Galen Clavio. Thanks for joining us here on Pod of the Century. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. So long, everybody.